have any follow-up this time, Mike.
Oh, you don't. That's right. It's just me. So I got 3 items of follow-up.
See, this is the way you need to do these books. Don't have action items because then you don't have to do follow-up.
There you go. All right. So my 3 action items were to not justify when saying no, which I failed as soon as we finished recording.
Nice.
Although I've done better since then, because as soon as we hung up, we were talking about the next recording time, and you threw out a date, and I was like, no, I can't make that work because, and you're like, no, I don't need to know. I didn't even realize that I was still doing it.
It was like 3 minutes.
Yep. 3 minutes. Yeah. After I said I wasn't going to do that anymore, I was doing it. But that event did kind of solidify my mind. Like, this is a big deal. You do this all the time. You don't even realize it. So I feel like I've done a better job with this since then, although I haven't had a whole lot of opportunities to just say no to things. It's been a little bit of a crazy couple weeks, but it's okay. I'm pushing through the last couple stages of some things, some projects. And, I suppose I could just jump in and say, no, I don't want to do this anymore, but I do want to do these things.
Yeah.
In October, basically beginning of October, next 12-week year, I've got a clean slate. So I'm sure I'll have a lot more opportunities starting then to just say, no, I'm not going to do that.
All right.
Next one, don't say I feel you. And this is a little bit more context. This is like when you're talking about things specifically with your significant other, at least that's the way I remember it from the book, where you're talking about the way that you feel and you couch it or you frame it kind of as like, I feel that you do this, and that kind of gets back to the fact that we judge others by their actions, but ourselves by our intentions. So, we don't think like we're really all that bad because we didn't mean to do that after all, but we kind of project that intention behind other people. And that's the way I kind of viewed that phrase. Like, I feel you did this. Like, it implies that there's some sort of evil intention behind it. And so I have not done this. And I've been very careful about this because there's been a couple of conversations my wife and I specifically have had, and working through some things. There was definitely an opportunity, but this was fresh in my mind, and I was really, really careful about how I chose my words. And it definitely went better because of that, I feel.
Good job, Mike. Proud of you.
The third one I had was the digital boundaries. And this I've done a pretty good job of, although I don't take it to the degree I think that they probably would have liked me to, according to the last book that we read, Boundaries. So they would basically say, like, turn off completely everything. But I've even, like, just to give you a couple of examples, like I still have my phone in my bedroom because I use Sleep Cycle. People can still get a hold of me if they really want to, but I've identified some of the major culprits that can demand my attention. Like, a lot of the stuff, I set this stuff up ahead of time. So, like, there's several Slack teams I'm involved in where I don't get notified unless somebody actually tags me in it, and nobody tags me in it because nobody knows how to use Slack. So.
Nice.
So I just go in and check it whenever. But since we read that book, I also turned off notifications on a couple other apps where I just kind of keep, I don't know. It's not that I'm going in there all the time, but I kind of keep tabs on, like, these forums sort of things. One of them is like the Mac Power Users forum that you built. So good job on that one, by the way.
I like that one.
So I've turned off, all the notifications for that type of stuff. And then I also deleted a couple Slack teams from my Slack instance on my iPhone. So I can get to them when I'm on my computer, but I cannot be notified when I am not at my computer. So I feel like I'm moving in the right direction with this, and I'm not completely turning them off like the authors probably would like me to, but I'm pretty happy with where I'm at.
I feel like you're just getting started.
With digital boundaries? Probably.
Yeah.
Although this is the guy who periodically completely deletes email off of his phone. So it's on there temporarily, but it's not going to be there long, I can tell you that.
Fair enough.
I get more and more dissatisfied with the state of email clients on iOS anyways. So every time I'm dealing with an email on my iOS device, I'm like, this is such garbage. Like, why am I even doing this? This isn't worth it. And there's maybe like 1 or 2 instances where I will need to get to an email on my iOS device. And that's the time when, I'll reinstall the Apple Mail app, and then I just leave it on there for a while, forget it's in there because it's in the catch-all Apple folder with all the apps that you never used to be able to delete, but now you can.
Right.
So every once in a while, I'll go back in there and I don't use this that much. I'll delete it. And then, 3 months later, I need an email.
I use flags a lot in email of things I need to come back and actually do something with, because a lot of emails I can respond to and kick out a response, right away. But there's quite a few that I have to do something, like I've got to go tweak the code and then respond right away. So I'll flag those. Oddly enough, it seems like a lot of iOS email apps struggle with flags. I don't know why that is, but it seems like they don't always sync across, or I don't know. It's weird.
iOS email apps are garbage. There are no good ones. There's the standard Apple Mail. That's really the only one that's usable, in my opinion, anymore. I used to love Dispatch because you could use the standard message URL format when you send stuff like OmniFocus, stuff like that. And I suppose if you're all in with something like Spark or Airmail, you could use something like that. But even those, like I've noticed the behavior that you're talking about, they're not that consistent.
Right.
And they try to lock you into their proprietary format. I don't want to use Spark everywhere. I would use Spark on my iOS device if it just gave me a great iOS email client and I could access those things that I send to OmniFocus in my other email client. Like when I'm on Mac, I want to be able to reply to those things in MailMate. But I don't know why. Like that's just not the way that iOS email app developers think.
Yes.
And it's really, really
I feel
frustrating.
like contact managers are the same way. It seems like they all want to put their own little notes or their own formats in the notes field. It's like, can you just use the default setup so I don't have to rely on... Anyway, we're going to get in the weeds on that one.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, but I have to rant on this for a second. iOS developers, give me the tools I need to do my job and get out of my way. Do not try to solve all the problems I do not have. That is so frustrating to me. Why is it so hard to just get some basic tools? That's why MailMate is so great on the Mac. It gives you nothing except what you need. It doesn't even show you images. It's all markdown based. It's text based, but that allows you to get in, crank through your email and get out of there as quickly as possible. They're not trying to make your experience as pleasant as possible. And hey, check out this other app that we developed. No, I don't care. I want to get out of my email.
That's true. You do have me sold on MailMate. I don't remember if we've talked about that here on Bookworm, but you did. So that's become my email client of choice. And I don't have email on my phone at all right now. So like that's my one and only...
It's gloriously ugly.
Yeah, it's my one and only viewport into email at all. So yes, you have me sold.
Awesome. Well, that's it for follow-up. Should we jump into the book?
Yes. So today's book, Work Clean by Dan Charnas. Did you look up, there's another version of this floating around. Did you look this up at all?
No, I mean, I only saw the one version on Amazon. The one I've got has got like the little green plus in the middle with the 4 letters, Work Clean, what great chefs can teach us about organization. Is there another one?
Well, there's the other version that is out, I think, is called Everything in Its Place.
Okay.
And that came out in December of 2017. And I was not fully aware of that until after we had decided to read this one. So I don't know the difference between the two. But it's by the same dude. And I think maybe what happened was he had the original and they wanted to make some revisions to it and did that like right away. But
wanted to make more money on the same
maybe,
idea.
I don't know. So
there was a book I read back in the day that did that. I bought the audio book and I think it was called The Way We're Working Isn't Working.
Okay.
And then I went to look for the physical book later and I couldn't find it. I'm like, what the heck? Where did this go? Turns out that it's a different name now and I forget what it was.
Got it. It also could be that because Work Clean is hardback and I think Everything in Its Place is paperback.
Well, you always go for the hardcover.
Yeah, because if you pull up Everything in Its Place on Amazon, it even says right there, previously published in hardcover as Work Clean. So I think it's the same book, just under a different title for paperback versus hardcover, which is so weird to me. Why would you change the name just based on the binding of the book? Everything else is the same, I would think. But
yeah, I didn't look at the other one. So, well, I guess if somebody read the other one, they can compare notes with us and let us know the inconsistencies.
Because they were both recommended on the Bookworm Club. That's the only reason I brought it up, because there was a slight conversation about
Sorry,
it.
we're not going to read them both, though.
Nope, because now I feel like reading the other one would be a waste of time. Anyway, there's a long prelude to Work Clean is about chefs in the kitchen and how they go about creating food and meals for people in restaurants. And it all revolves around this concept of mise en place, which I know you were happy I said that word last time. So, but
Yep.
Side note, my wife is big into like French cooking, and actually works at like a gourmet kitchen shop part-time.
So she's a mise en place.
Yeah, so she works with a trained chef on a weekly basis, so I get the benefit of understanding a lot of those terms and understanding how all the details work. So I get it. I get some firsthand, well, I guess that would be secondhand knowledge from a chef through that. So anyway, this is it's interesting. The tagline on this is what great chefs can teach us about organization. And Dan Charnas goes through the process of basically trying to figure out how is it that chefs can do a whole lot of work in very small spaces and in very short time frames and with extremely high consistency. And I feel like that's kind of the like if you were to look at productivity from, I guess, a cliche or a stereotyped view, that's probably the goal, is to crank out work extremely fast and extremely well at high levels. That would be the quintessential goal of productivity. I think that's probably a fair assumption there. And this looks at that from the view of a chef, which I thought was very fascinating to dive into.
Yeah, later on in the book, he basically talks about how chefs need to have this stuff nailed down. Page 46, he says, chefs don't plan well because they are better than us. They plan because if they don't, their career is dead.
Yeah.
So a little bit of trial by fire, but I think that there's a lot that we can learn from this. And I like the analogy, at least for the first 150 pages or so.
Sure.
I think it's really interesting. And in the first section, they talk about the whole idea of mise en place, and he calls out two specific things between the kitchen and the office, which I thought was really interesting from a productivity perspective. So the main ideas that pertain especially to the chefs that he was talking to, because these are like the world famous chefs, the ones cooking on TV in the really fancy restaurants. It's not the guys working at TGI Fridays.
No, not exactly.
Yeah. So there's an idea that he unpacks in the book of craftsmanship, which totally makes sense from that perspective. And that reminded me of like the craftsman mindset from when we read Deep Work by Cal Newport. And in there, he talks about, not to rehash that whole book, but there was one story in particular that really stood out to me about the guy in Wisconsin who made like Viking swords, and how there's like no market for these Viking swords, but he gets paid a lot of money for each one he creates.
Right.
Even though it's so much work, because he's developed this craftsman mindset towards it. And I think that the really good chefs, like they do the same thing when they apply that craftsman mindset towards the dishes that they are creating. And I think that that's a really powerful idea that people need to apply to their own work, whatever it is. And if you apply that idea of craftsmanship towards what you are creating, even if you are cranking out widgets, like maybe you're not a knowledge worker, you don't do quote unquote deep work, like you can still be invested in what you're doing, do it to the very best of your ability, and really approach it like a craftsman. And that's going to have a very positive impact. The other idea, which is really interesting to me and something that I've talked about recently that I've struggled a little bit with. Chefs, they leave work at work. They're not going to take their mushrooms home and cut them at night, and bring them back to the restaurant. And they're kind of forced to do that because of the way that their workspace is set up. But how many of us, myself included, like, I'm done for the day, quote unquote, and then I'll go upstairs, and we're just talking about email on my phone, I'll go check something. I'll find something somewhere which can pull me back into thinking about work if I'm not careful, because there isn't that physical place change that happens. I don't hop on a train and commute every day and like, okay, I'm done now. It's a lot harder to make that mental switch, but one of the reasons that these chefs are successful is because that's what they do.
Yeah, that reminds me of a lot of how, like, life on the farm that I came from, where I grew up. because it wasn't a matter of trying to keep track of the work you needed to do, because you'd walk out the back door and you could see, like, oh, the cows are hungry. I guess I should feed them. Okay, gonna do that now. But it's not possible for me to take the chore of feeding the cows home with me at night. Like, it doesn't work. Like, you have to go to them to do that. Like, I can't do that in my kitchen.
You can't worry about, I wonder if the cows are
hungry. Right.
While you're laying in your bed, because it's not going to do anything.
So it's just different. Whereas, and we were talking about some of the stressors of, running businesses and stuff before we started recording. And one of those that, like, I've seen that a lot lately is just how often I think about client projects over dinner with my family, which is frustrating. But how do you go about stopping that? I don't know. I don't know that you fully can. I mean, in theory, you can. But if you start quizzing people who say that they've beat that, well, it does still crop up once in a while. It still comes up fairly regularly. So I don't know that you'll ever fully beat that in the world of knowledge work, but I think there's a lot of things you can do to somewhat alleviate that, or build cultures that alleviate that. So yes, all that to say, in today's world, it's very different than the world of like a kitchen or a farm. It's just a different setup altogether.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of similarities between those two, which we could probably unpack, except I have no idea of what really goes into being a farmer. But one of the phrases that stood out to me in this first section was that tomorrow starts today, and they get everything ready. It seems to me like if you're going to be up at the crack of dawn and you're going to be doing X, Y, and Z on the farm, you have to have thought that through ahead of time. You have to know what the next thing is all the time. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I mean, at least the farm that I operated on, it was pretty easy to just know which fields you need to take care of and what the animals need every day. So you're building routines and processes that happen every single day in order to know what comes next.
Yeah, but farms are big sometimes.
Yeah, it can be.
So you're not going to be like, oh, I'm going to go do, let's see, what do I feel like doing? I know, I'll go do this thing. And you go way over to the north end of the farm, and then you're like, oh, I forgot. I was supposed to feed the animals. Go way back down to the south end of the farm. Like you can't do that. It's not going to work. How many of us knowledge workers, though, take that approach to our day?
True.
Wake up in the morning. It's like, well, what should I work on now? Better check my email. Oh, look, there's something I need to respond to.
Yep.
Which is why I printed out that sheet and I fill it out every day, because like that provides for me enough direction that I kind of know like what the next thing is. I don't feel out of control anymore, where you are constantly being thrown back and forth about like, what is the next best thing to do right now? Like you have some plan for your day, and yeah, maybe it gets thrown off, but that's okay. The intentionality that you applied to it, like that's really the important thing. And that kind of gets into the three values of mise en place from this book. Number 1, preparation. Number 2, process. And number 3, presence, which I think maybe you could use the word mindfulness here, like being aware that this is the best thing. You're not just like going through the motions and doing a rote task just to check off a box, like applying everything that you have to the thing at hand. And then preparation, having all your tools, everything ready to go. So when you sit down to do it, everything is right there. And then process, standard operating procedure. This is the way we do things. So that makes it easier to do it. But ultimately, the thing that makes it high quality is the mindfulness aspect of it, the presence, the third part of that.
Yeah, and I think you're right with the presence to mindfulness piece. And I think there was one place where he even made that jump with the office setup, because I think that's something that comes up quite a bit. How many times have we talked about meditation on this show? And how many times have I said I'm going to try it and don't fully follow through on it? That part struck me, I guess. Yeah.
That's funny. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, I can totally see how you could go there. I don't think you talked a whole lot about that aspect of it throughout the book.
Not throughout it, no.
Yeah, I can totally see where your brain went there.
I made that jump right away. I'm projecting a little bit there, but I was thinking about it in the back of my head. It's like he refers to a lot of scenarios where the chef is doing something very stressful and very high intensity, and yet they are in like a zen-like mode. And every time I saw that, analogy or that reference. It's like, okay, so how do you translate that to the office setup? Well, I guess that brings us back to the world of meditation again, or stopping and taking a breath. How good are you at this, Joe? Quite terrible. And yet if we look at action items, I have nothing around this. So, so I thought about it a lot, but yeah, I'm still not going to put an action item on it.
I may have to force you to read 10% Happier or something.
What's the big one that everybody talks about with meditation?
Probably 10% Happier. That's the Dan Harris
there you go.
story.
Yeah, that is.
I mean, it's not like a typical self-help type book. It's more his story, but he was the NBC Nightline guy who had a panic attack on the air and is like, what's going on here? And then tried meditation, and his unscientific estimation, he said it makes him about 10% happier.
Yeah. Well, I know that like that's, I always struggle to know if that's the right book or not, because I think of the tagline a lot versus what the actual title is, which has something to do with like meditation for skeptics or something like that. That's how I think of it.
Yeah.
But yes, please don't make me read it. Do I have to read that?
All right. Well, I won't make you read it now anyways. We've got our next couple books picked out.
Sure.
But on that topic, though, it's interesting. They had a statistic in here that Americans spend more than $10 billion per year on self-help. Holy cow.
That's nuts.
So if you benefit from Bookworm, send us a couple bucks.
So how does Bookworm get into that category?
Yeah, no kidding. I saw you in my mind maps.
There you go.
This one's pretty big. And I also started doing something a little bit different. I put little emojis next to the things that I wanted to call out for the outline.
Ooh.
Or really just to review. So I use MindNode and I create action items, so tasks for my action items. And then like key ideas, I put like a little key emoji before. Quotes that I wanted to remember, I put like a little quote bubble. And then the talking points, I have like the speaking head. So that made putting together the outline for this actually really easy.
Nice.
Because I just found all the little speaking head icons and threw all that stuff in there.
Nice.
I have to ask you before we move on to the next section, though, what did you think of this story about Jeremy?
Which one's the one about Jeremy?
The Office story at the very beginning. The guy who tells his wife that he's going to be there for soccer or something, and then his entire day gets thrown off and he forgets everything and does nothing.
It sounded like a lot of managers I used to work with in corporate.
Okay. I kind of had the same reaction to that story as the story at the end of Boundaries. I'm like, okay, we get the point. Dial it back about 5 notches.
But here's the thing, though. Like, I didn't feel like that one was far-fetched in this case. In Boundaries, I felt like it was forced and he exaggerated some things.
Okay.
But I can think of about 3 people who had that experience or worse on a regular basis. So to me, I'm not sure I would think that one was far out of line. But at the same time, it's pretty intense. Like, I think about the people that I know now and like my life and how things work now. It's like, that is intense. Like, did I ever work like that? That was what went through my head. Mike was like, did I ever do this?
One specific detail of this story that just stands out to me is the fact that he's in the meeting daydreaming about something he's supposed to be doing and then agrees to do something he doesn't even know what he agreed to.
Right.
I was like, nobody does that.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do.
I'll admit that I wasn't paying attention. Like, hey, can you repeat that one more time before I say, oh, yeah, no problem.
Yep. And that one actually bit him because it came back and it was something he had to have that done that day, and it applied to, he ended up missing a whole deadline because of it. So, yes.
Well, I'll defer to you, I guess. You know, if you say that happens, I'll believe you. But I read that and I was like, okay.
Yep. I kid you not, late last week, I had a client that did that to me. I asked if something was okay by a certain time frame. They said yes. And then we followed up on it earlier today, and they don't remember that happening at all. Like, what? I have a recording of this. So I can prove that this is something you agreed to, but they had no clue. So either they were trying to get out of it or just completely spaced on it. It happens. It does. Sorry, Mike.
All right. Yeah, like I said, I'll take your word for it. In that case, these people, they definitely need these 10 ingredients we're about to talk about.
Sure. But you've got 4 of the 10 here. Do you want to read all 10 of them off, and then we'll talk about 4 of them?
Yeah, I think it's probably too much to go through each one, and I don't think each one really deserves
there's some pretty small
a lengthy
points
explanation. but there's a couple of them that things stood out to me. So let's run through all the 10 ingredients as they call them in the book, and then we'll pick out a couple. Which, by the way, backing up just a bit, this book is split into 3 different sections.
Aren't they all?
Yeah, but because it's based in the world of chefs, they call it first course, second course, and third course, which was at least clever.
Yep.
First course is the power of working clean, which is kind of what we talked about with mise en place, introducing that idea. The second course is the 10 ingredients of working clean, and then the third course is working clean as a way of life. So the 10 ingredients, real briefly, the first one, planning is prime. Second one, arranging spaces, perfecting movements. Third one, cleaning as you go. Fourth one, making first moves. Fifth one, finishing actions. Sixth, slowing down to speed up. Seventh, open eyes and ears. Eighth, call and call back. Ninth, inspect and correct. 10th, total utilization. So lots of different stuff there. A lot of these are productivity principles that I'm familiar with, but they phrased them a little bit different. Some of the stuff is really great advice. Some of it I'm not sure I agree with, which is why I picked out just a couple of these. And if you want to talk about any other ones, feel free to put them in here.
I have one I'm going to add, but you talk and I'll add.
Okay, cool. The first one, though, planning is prime. And I should also add that each one of these ingredients is a chapter, and he starts it with a story about a chef and usually some failure and then correction of the principle that they're going to be talking about. And at the end, they give a couple pages of kind of like action items. They're not really action items, but it's distilling it down into more practical applications of this outside of a kitchen, which I thought was kind of cool. But in this first one, they talk about different types of planning errors and how you need to be able to plan ahead. Key idea from this section is to greet the day, not fight it. This is where that phrase, chefs don't plan well because they're better than us. They plan because they don't. If they don't, their career is dead. That's where it comes in. And the thing that I want to talk about here is the section on page 57, at least in my version of the book, where they talk about tasks and how they should be on your calendar. So before I rant, I'm going to give you a chance to either jack me up or talk me off the ledge.
Okay, I'll talk you off a ledge because this is one of my action items.
Okay.
And it's a little bit twofold. I guess I have it as 2 different action items here. But so OmniFocus, one of the things that they've implemented on the iOS 3, the OmniFocus 3 version for iOS, is the ability to see appointments on your calendar and do tasks or deferred tasks all in a line, so you can see them as the day goes on.
Yep.
And that's coming to OmniFocus 3 for the Mac as well, so they're bringing that over.
If you use due dates.
Because I don't really use due dates at all in OmniFocus, it means that I can use due dates for whatever I want. And whenever I have an actual date when something absolutely must get done, I already have a habit of putting it on my calendar. So because I know it has to happen that day and my calendar is my roadmap for the day. So because I'm so picky about that, I can use those due dates and use OmniFocus to use the 2 of them in conjunction with each other, so I can see my tasks and the calendar items in one place without it cluttering up my calendar itself. So, because of that, I can see what he's getting at. But at the same time, this can come back to, I believe it's Patrick Rohn that said this at one point. This has been maybe 3-4 years ago.
Yep. I remember this episode of Mics on Mics like it was yesterday.
Yeah, I know. It's like, I still miss Mics on Mics. Come on, Farty, come on. But Patrick Rohn would say, if not now, when? A very simple question. And when you really start to get into it, if you're going to defer a task, when are you going to defer it to other than just a black hole? Okay, if you're going to fully adopt that, then yes, it should either go on a calendar or in a system that has a specific date and time when you're going to do it. So that's the theory there, is that, if you're going to do something, commit to it and put it, say when you're going to do it and then follow through on it. I think that's the mentality that he's going for here, because I want to start using that forecast view more. I haven't decided. I put an action item here as hyper scheduling, but as I'm talking, I'm putting a question mark next to that because I know this is something that David Sparks does and has written about lately, but I've played around with using like estimated times in OmniFocus and then moving them over to, say, Fantastical so that it puts it on my calendar. I haven't fully decided if I want to do that or not because typically my day gets derailed and it completely falls apart. So I'm not sure I fully want to do that, but there's some ways of thinking about it that I might want to experiment with to get there. But I think I know where you're going to go with this whole appointments and tasks being the same. So I'll quit my little journey and let you join in on your rants.
Okay. Well, before the rant, maybe I can redeem this a little bit
okay,
and
so
not sound like a jerk.
you're going to put a disclaimer on your rant now.
Well, I will say that as we record this, about a month ago, I was a guest on Learn OmniFocus with Tim Stringer.
Yep.
And I walked through my OmniFocus setup, and there were a handful of people in there who said, I can't believe how little you have in your OmniFocus.
Yep.
And I hear the other thing from people all the time, though, is, oh my gosh, I can't believe how much you get done.
Yep.
So there's not a direct correlation between the number of tasks that are in your system and the number of things that you have to maintain,
right,
and the amount of work that you actually produce. And I think that's a really big mental hurdle for a lot of people to get over. So I will use OmniFocus strategically for a couple of different things. And I went over those in I think there's a YouTube recording of it if people wanted to go look at it. So I'll put in like ideas in there so that when I need to do backlog grooming for blog posts, whatever, for agent efficiency, I've got a whole bunch of ideas. I can just slot them in. I jot those down as I think of them. I've got my 12-week years measured in there. I've got thinking time questions. So when there's a question I want to ponder for a while, I'll put it down with a tag of thinking time. And then when I do have thinking time, like I'll just go to that perspective and I'll grab one of those questions and I'll just think about that for a while. So different applications of stuff there, but it's not a list of everything that I have to do in a given day. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The big one is that agent efficiency is a team, and OmniFocus is not made for teams, even with the web version. So we use Jira, which means that I either have to copy all of those tasks into OmniFocus if I want to work just off of OmniFocus and then maintain two task management systems, or be okay with when I'm in agent efficiency mode, I'm not even looking at OmniFocus, which is kind of where I've landed. Now, OmniFocus can do all sorts of great stuff. Like you were talking about, you can put in the due dates, you can put in the estimations, you can hyper schedule, you can pack that forecast view, and you can tailor it so it looks absolutely beautiful and tomorrow's going to be awesome. And then exactly what you just said happens, it gets blown up. And then you've got to go back and you've got to adjust a whole bunch of things, which is why, to answer the Patrick Rowan question, if not now, when? For a lot of the stuff I do, it'd be like, I don't care. Not now. That's all I care about.
Later, somewhere down the road.
So yeah. I'll put it in a someday maybe list. I'll review it every 3 months. And eventually when it is the right time, I'll schedule the time to work on it. But I think doing that on a regular basis with all of your different tasks is overkill for a lot of people. No, I'm not saying you can't do that, but I just think you shouldn't default to that. And I think that there is a truth to be had here where there are scheduled and unscheduled tasks, and your unscheduled tasks, if you really want to get them done, you've got to create the time on your calendar to get them done. That kind of goes along though with one of, was it this section they were talking about not just the daily me's, but like finding your me's point, how many tasks you can complete in a day.
I think so. That sounds right.
Yeah. So I think that has a lot more value than saying, I'm going to defer this or make this due on this particular day. Because I can tell you, if I started doing that, I would just be picking arbitrary due dates sometime in the future. And then all of a sudden it gets to that day and there's 20 things here and you're stressed out already and you're trying to defer some things because there's no way you can get it all done. You might defer the wrong ones. So I tend to fall into the camp of only put the absolutely time sensitive things on your calendar, but I also, I time block every day. and I set aside time for it. This is what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be doing deep work here. I'm going to be writing right here. I'm going to be recording a podcast right here. So I do set aside the time for some of those things, but I don't put all of those details into a task management system and track all of that because it's just not worth it to me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, whenever I mentioned like the hyper scheduling thing that I'm considering, it's a bit of a misnomer, at least for me, because I think what I'm doing the best I can to adapt to the tags thing and OmniFocus. I'm trying. I was one that was kind of against them even considering moving to tags, and I know I'm in the minority, but
you're a purist.
Because and I'm going to get into this later. Whenever you starts explaining the work clean system, all I saw was GTD the whole time. I could not help it.
Yep.
Side note, with the tags thing, I'm trying to get to the point where I understand and have a system that allows me to put multiple contexts on a given task. And the reason for that is because what I'm trying to do is determine the types of work that I do or need to do and determine when the best time of day is for that type of work, which is a lot harder to do than you would think, especially when you do client work, because I could spend the entire day just writing and responding to email. And I think some of my clients would prefer it if that was all I did. But especially lately, it's darn near impossible for me to stick with email. But I think what I'm trying to do is determine what these types of work are. Communications is definitely one of them. Developing code or brainstorming. Like, these are different mindsets and different modes of working. And I know the different times of day, I think, when I'm best suited for each of those. And the problem is that sometimes, like, mid-morning is like a sweet spot for me. So brainstorming needs to be at that time. But that's also like my core deep work time. It's when I'm going to get code done. It's when I'm going to, be able to handle difficult projects. So, and that time is limited, even more so lately with health stuff. So because of that, I have to like pick and choose which of those mindsets I'm going to work on in those specific times. So when I say hyper scheduling, that's the type of thing I'm referring to, is this mode of work needs to happen at that time, and then tagging work in OmniFocus that fits that, and then that is the view that I'm looking at whenever I get to that time of day, which I think is probably similar to what you're doing, just more intuitively and less explicitly. Is that fair?
Yep. So if I were to apply this myself, I would probably work the same way and say, I've got 2 hours to do this type of task, and I'm going to go look at my perspective, which contains all those types of tasks, and I'm going to select 1 or 2 to work on. The difference is that I'm not going to put the due dates on those things, because who cares?
Yeah. And I think if I was working that way, I would probably ignore the due dates as well. Like, I think it would probably get to be too much to do it that way.
Yeah. And then obviously there's different ways that you can do this digitally or analog. A lot of people probably would like flag those or put them in an action perspective. I know a lot of people do that with email. They'll put things they need to reply to in an action folder. But the problem is that you just throw them all in the digital folder, and then like all of a sudden you go in there to do stuff. Holy cow, I got 27 things in here for today.
Yep.
So that's why I transfer it all to paper, and I've got space for 5 most important tasks. That's my Mies point, or my Mies number, those 5 things, whether they be meetings that have a specific time or they're just something that I need to get done at some point that day. Those are the 5 things that are most important. Those are the things I'm going to make sure that I get done. And actually, it's up to 5. It's not more than 5. I kind of felt the way that they described this, it seemed very open-ended about finding your Mies point, how many tasks you can complete. I think that's pretty dangerous, honestly. I think a lot of people will bite off more than they can chew if like they just reading this book and they're going to start applying this system. Like, they'll do 5 one day and be like, oh, I can do 6, and then they do 6, and then they bump it up to 7, 8, 10, whatever. And then before long, they're consistently not hitting their Mies point,
Right.
and stuff's backing up in their system, and then eventually they're calling agent efficiency for help because everything's overwhelmed. Like we deal with people, we help people like that all the time. Like that's they come there because like I don't know what to do anymore, and I kind of see this system, quote unquote, they teach in this book, like contributing to that if you're not careful. I think there needs to be more parameters around this. There's got to be some training wheels.
Yeah, I'm with you there. During this section is when they introduced the concept of a daily Mies. And we've talked about Mies point, and I think we've maybe even referred to daily Mies already, but that's shorthand for mise en place, just to make that clear for the listeners. By daily Mies, if you want to translate this, it's a daily review. And if you want to go into the GTD world, this is when you're figuring out what tasks you're going to work on that day. Like, that's it, really. I think it does get a little bit more than that. This hyper-scheduling thing or this planning process, he says to take 30 minutes a day and do that. Schedule out what your actions are going to be for that day. Clean up your desk, do all the little stuff to get yourself back in top working condition. Who is it? Stephen Covey, sharpen the saw, that concept.
Yep.
That would be the same thing here. This is an idea that I think we've seen referenced in multiple books now. Everybody likes to create their own term for it. Everyone likes to say, they like to coin a phrase around it, typically. So I think this is one that's useful. I've had something like this. I don't think I've unified it as much as what he refers to. Like, planning out the day ahead of time is something I haven't been real great at, but probably should be. So that's a piece that I want to try to do there. But planning out your day, cleaning up the workspace at my desk, cleaning up my digital workspace at the same time, like those are all things that in theory I'm doing, but in reality, I do rarely.
And that is the great hypocrisy of every productive person on the internet.
Especially every productivity writer out there.
Yeah. We struggle with the same stuff, guys. We know what to do, but we don't always do it.
Or in most cases, don't.
Yeah, I had the same thought, and one of my action items is to create my daily Mies. And I kind of viewed it, in my head at the time, I viewed it as like a shutdown routine, but hearing you describe it just now, I think that kind of clarified it a little bit more. You explained it better than I had in my head, but the essential idea was still the same. Like, I want to make sure that before I leave for the day, I've emptied out my drafts inbox, I've emptied out my OmniFocus inbox, I've emptied out my email inbox. Like that, those are the types of things that I typically just leave, and then, okay, I'm done working, I got to go. I'll come back the next day and I don't want to deal with this stuff again. And that's why, like, I won't check my email for a week. And then at Friday, I'll crank through 450 messages in my same later folder.
Yep.
And I think that, like he said, it's 30 minutes a day. I don't even think it would take me 30 minutes a day, but I want to establish that habit of just emptying those things all the time. And I feel like that would give me a lot bigger sense of control over my day. I think that, like, talking about GTD, you can tell that Dan is definitely a GTD fanboy.
Sure. For sure.
I think that he really buys into this idea of I think it was David Allen who said, on the paper, off the mind. Write these things down, put them in the system that you can trust, and then you don't have to worry about them anymore. I recognize that I do a good job getting them in, but then I don't look at them consistently enough to empty them. I need to empty those inboxes, David Allen will call it, on a more consistent basis. I want to make that part of my daily Mies.
Yeah, do you know when you're putting this within your day? Because you mentioned like shutdown ritual. That's exactly when I'm doing it or planning to do it.
That's the hard part, because like today we're recording this podcast, and then basically as soon as we get done, I'm jumping in the car and heading to Oshkosh, even though my list is not done yet.
Yep.
So what do I do there? Do I make sure I do my daily Mies anyways and just kick off the other things I didn't get done until tomorrow? Maybe. I haven't really thought through that whole process yet. But just like I consistently do my morning routine now, like that was a struggle for me for quite a while. But I've gotten into a habit with that. I want to do the same sort of thing with this daily Mies. And I like the idea of the daily me's better than just a shutdown routine.
Yeah.
I think the shutdown routine, the way that's phrased, it makes it easy for me to think like, well, I don't need to worry about that. I just got to go.
Right.
But this is kind of putting tomorrow, you're thinking about tomorrow today, like getting myself in a state where tomorrow my work is going to be easier. I don't know. I think that might help it stick.
Yeah. I created a checklist in OmniFocus literally called Mise en Place.
Of course you did.
I know, right? And what I ended up doing, and I didn't really intend this until I started planning it out. So I'm curious to see whenever you do this and we talk about it next time, how this actually works out, because I had previously a checklist for the shutdown ritual, and I had like an evening ritual, and then a daily review. All three of those, for whatever reason, when I was planning this out, they seemed to all like converge on each other, and I realized that what I actually needed to do was build like this checklist that starts right before I get off of work and just runs until bedtime, which is weird to me that my entire afternoon and evening operates off of a checklist. And I don't really follow it per se, but the structure is there. So it has things like cleaning out. I try to do all like my inbox clearing before I get off work. But then there's things that I try to do when I first get off work that helps keep the house up, like checking on laundry or checking to make sure dishes are put away or clean and that sort of thing. And I've just found that those tend to help me keep my little world in order, and that's been extremely helpful. But at the same time, the planning out of the next day, I have found, I think it's actually best to do that at night before I go to bed. So I'm trying to do it from my phone, which means that the system in OmniFocus that I end up using has to work off of that.
Not a good idea.
I don't know that that's a good idea, though.
Yeah.
So like my brain starts to run with it. So I don't know that will really work out, but there's got to be some timing in there when it all works out. So I think, like for me, this whole daily me's thing, like kind of needs to be at the end of the workday, but it kind of needs to be later in the day as well. So I don't know where it's going to land.
That's what you just described is the exact problem I've always had with any sort of like evening routine in OmniFocus is I don't want to be going to my phone.
Yeah.
And I even struggle with this a little bit with my journaling reflection, which I use a workflow for. Soon it'll be a shortcut.
There you go.
But like I don't want to go to my phone for that type of stuff. It just feels wrong on so many levels. But if you don't, like if you have your checklist in there and you don't, then you get into it the next day and you have to go through and check off all the things. Oh, I actually did that. Like that just kind of undermines the credibility of your system, at least to me. It's like, well, if I did these things, but my system says I didn't do these things, can I really trust my system?
Fair enough. All right.
That's a tough one. Let me know what you do.
Okay. We can talk about it next time when I still don't know what I want to do. Yep. It's forever a process. Okay. So planning is prime. That's the first ingredient of the habits of sorts. I'm going to skip number 2, and this is the one I added here, was number 3, cleaning as you go. Because I feel like this is something that I do in almost every area of my life as much as I can, except digitally. So the concept here is that as you go about doing your work, you're cleaning up behind yourself such that when you're done, you have very little to do because it's already done. So as far as like putting everything back where it belongs. I think a good place to see this is just in people's general cleanliness around their house. Like that seems to be a good way to see that, especially with kids because they do not do this. And it drives me up the wall. And I think every night before dinner, I'm playing cop and, you have this room to clean up and you have that room to clean up. And if you don't get it done in time, you will not be getting dinner. Like that is the way it goes. But yeah, anyway, I feel like this is something that I have been trying to pour over to a digital space because I'm pretty sure on the digital side, I am terrible at this. simple things like I'm looking at Safari right now, and I think I have like 15 tabs open. On that window, I also have 4 different windows open. So I probably have somewhere around 25 or 30 tabs open in Safari. Why? Dunno. Just the way I do things. Some of those are articles I want to read. Sometimes it's forms I want to fill out or products I'm looking at buying or something like that. And instead of putting that somewhere and coming back to it thoughtfully, I just leave a Safari tab open for it. No idea why I do that, but it's something that I do. So I'm not real good about cleaning up behind myself digitally. That might have something to do with the fact that it doesn't seem to matter because all I have to do is close the lid and it's gone.
Yeah.
So I don't have to look at it.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, so there's an analog physicality aspect here where I don't have a problem cleaning up my desk, but I have a problem keeping my computer clean. Do you deal with this? Is this just me? Because I feel like I'm a bit of a crazy person here.
No, I just talked about this in the first one. I don't empty out my inboxes.
There you go.
Stuff sits in there forever. So I definitely need to do that, do a better job of that. I just put it along the daily me's stuff as opposed to cleaning as you go. But again, this is something I totally get the value of and I struggle with because like you said, you just close the lid and you don't see it anymore. But this section right here really hit on a bunch of stuff for me and caused me to think about a whole bunch of things a little bit differently. And I don't have any specific action items from this one, but I know that it's going to impact my workspace and even like our home because it's a very small thing, but like I have my desk set up and I've got a bigger desk, so it's got plenty of room. And as we're recording this right now, I've got my headphones plugged into my recording interface. When I get done, I take the headphones off, I put them on the desk, but there is no place for the headphones. And after reading this section, that bothered me. It's like, I've got pens out on my desk, but I don't have a place for the pens. I've got my headphones on the desk. I don't have a place for the headphones. I got to buy one of those Ugmonk gathers, and I held off, but I was so close to buying it like 4 or 5 times in the last week. I'm like, this is awesome. When I saw it, when it launched, I'm like, well, who would use that sort of thing? And then I read this book and I'm like, I get it. There's a place for this. There's a place for that. Oh, that would make my desk so much better. I bought a trash can for my office. I didn't have a trash can.
What?
I told this
to
David Sparks the other day. How
did you have an office without a trash can? What? I don't even understand that.
I don't have any use for a trash can except for one thing. I fill out this sheet every single day. And in the morning, if I haven't filled it out the night before, I'll rip the sheet off and I'll create the new one for the day. And I've got the piece of paper now. I have to go upstairs to throw it away. And I thought to myself, it's one time a day. Why do I need to buy myself a trash can? Look at you. You're so fancy. You can't go up the stairs. That's how I justified it to myself. But I'm like, no, I need to have a trash can right here just for that one piece of paper that I throw away every day. But and so I want to take additional steps, but I don't know exactly what they are yet, and I definitely do not want to spend a bunch of money to figure out a place for everything in my workspace so that when I am done for the day, I can empty the inboxes, I can put everything back exactly where it is supposed to be, put it in its home, and then it's right there where it's supposed to be when I come back the next day.
I have an action item here over this. I want to sketch out my workspace. So my main desk, because I have things like I've got a soundboard, I've got a video encoder, I've got my microphone, I've got my headphones, I've usually got 2 or 3 books, plus some notepads, pens, note cards. It's easy for me to rattle all this off. I'm sitting here looking at it. I have all this stuff, but I feel like it is in a good spot, but overall, I get the impression that it's not laid out right. Because even as we've been recording this, I've caught myself reaching across myself a few times. Okay, so that tells me I've got the pins on the wrong side, but I can't put them over here because my soundboard is there. But I keep reaching over this way to do my soundboard. Anyway, all that to say, I think I have my setup backwards, but I'm not real sure. So what I need to do is sketch out basically my desk and try to figure out, well, what hand do I normally use things with, and try to move things to that side. And I think that may actually force me to move my screen off center, which might drive me a little bit mad, because I'm pretty sure that I really like having my computer sit dead center on my desk, because that's what everyone does. But I think I actually need it off center. And I don't think I'm going to like that, Mike.
You and Johnny Ive both.
I know. I want it centered. But I don't think it actually makes sense. Logistically, I don't think it makes sense. But I won't know that until I sketch it out. So therefore, I have an action item to sketch it out.
Cool. You going to share your sketch with us?
Sure, I'll do that.
Awesome.
This is me dropping my pen because I was trying to grab a pen to write it. Share desk sketch. There you go. I got it written down.
Awesome.
No idea where that's going to land. It'll end up on Bookworm somehow.
Yep. Anything else from cleaning as you go, or should we go to the fourth ingredient?
No, let's go to number 4.
All right. So the fourth ingredient is making first moves. I retitled this in my head. Okay. Eating your frog. Like, that's really what this came down to for me.
We need to do that book.
He talks about,
bring it up all the time.
He talks about the first moments count more than the later ones, and that not all time is created equal. He talked about how the present has more value than the future. I really do think that there's a lot of truth to all of that. The whole idea of making first moves seemed kind of weird to me. But yeah, first things first, basically eating your frog, doing the things that you tend to procrastinate on early. That's not how he phrased it in this book, but that's where my mind went. Like, if you've got a big project that you want to accomplish, you have to take action on that thing early in the day. It's got to be important enough to prioritize. Otherwise, you're just never going to get around to it. Which is why I always cringe a little bit when people are like, "Oh, I work better at night. I'm a night owl. I'm just going to save my most important tasks for later on." And I'm like, well, okay, you do you, but when you're still in the situation that you are and you're not making as much progress as you want to, like, come back and let's talk.
Yeah.
Because eating that frog, like, that's the thing that got me to write my book, got me connected with Asian Efficiency, got me connected with everybody that I work with online today. Like, that's really the thing. If you were to distill how I got to where I am, like, the one thing I did was I ate my frog. I prioritized those things, and I did them first. So I get the idea of making first moves. And a lot of times, like, there's different ways this could be applied too. It's not just doing the hard things first in the day. It's also, you've got a big project. The natural tendency is going to be to hold back on that thing. Well, let me just plan this a little bit more. Let me fiddle with my system a little bit more. Let me rearrange my tasks in alphabetical order and OmniFocus, rather than doing something because it's hard. Yeah. So there's a lot of value in this, but I don't know. I think like this whole chapter made it a little bit more difficult than it needed to be. Really, just do the important stuff right away. If I were to sum it up, that's what I would say.
I think he screwed this chapter up. Like, I do. And I think what you're getting at, I think, is what he intended. But the problem I had was, so the story that he tells here is that whenever something comes into the kitchen, so an order comes in for a meal, and the chef calls out what that order is, and one of the cooks, the basic example that he uses is they take a pan and they put it on the range. And that pan on the range is their reminder that they have mushrooms to cook. Like, that is how they know what comes out. And that is their first move, is putting the pan on the fire.
Pans down. Yep.
Pans down. Well, I think what he was trying to say, and what he ended up saying in the book, was that do the first thing to get something started.
Yeah.
I think is how you got to eat that frog. But I think he used the wrong story here to introduce the topic, because to me, whenever you're putting, pans down, putting a pan on the fire, what you're actually doing is creating a reminder to do that. Like, you're not physically doing the task. You're not doing the thing you don't want to do first. You're creating the reminder to do something. And I cannot place the word, but it has to do with, it's something like propinquity or something like that. It has to do with, like, putting something in place such that you don't forget it. Like if you want to remember to take a book with you to work, set a book on top of your car keys. Like that type of thing, I think is what he actually should have been talking about in that particular chapter, but he didn't. So like I feel like he came at it wrong.
Yeah.
And I got really confused because of how he was discussing a specific story, but then like made this pretty big jump to make this statement of, basically just get to work. Like was how I came out from that. But I really wanted him to go through the process of explaining from a digital and an office stance what the equivalent would be to creating that reminder, which I think if I were to make that jump, what he's actually trying to do is say, write it into a system.
Could be.
When something comes to you, get it into your system. Like to me, that's what he should have been making the jump for instead of, do the most important things first thing in the morning. Like to me, those were two different competing things that he was trying to convey in the same chapter.
That's a good point. I never really thought about it till you described it, but going back over my notes, you're right. He kind of is talking about like, this is how you multitask.
Right.
It doesn't work. Like if you're going to apply this to the way you handle email, if you were to, because he talks about the 3 benefits of first moves. Number 1, it creates a mark. And I put in parentheses, task and OmniFocus, like you said. But let's say you're going through your email and you're not using a task management system. Let's say you're just flagging your emails. So you're going through your emails and you're just flagging them, not responding to them. How does that help you? Like I could totally see a scenario where, okay, I flagged all my emails. Now I'm going to go do something else. And you forget about your flagged emails. In the kitchen, you're maybe not going to forget that you've got a pan on the range. Like it's always right there in your face. So maybe that example isn't exactly what he's talking about. But yeah, I guess, that's the first part, creating a mark. And I zeroed in on the second and third of the benefits. It creates momentum and then it multiplies your time. I think both of those tie directly to eating your frog. If you do the hardest thing first thing in the morning, from Eat That Frog, the idea is that you can go through the rest of your day knowing at least you got that thing done and you feel good about that. If your day doesn't get thrown off track, you've created a bunch of momentum for the rest of your day. If your day does get thrown off track, then at least you got that thing done and you can feel good about that. But because you're using your resources in the best way possible, at the beginning of your day, you got the most mental horsepower to throw at things, then that is going to, number 3, multiply your time. And he talks a little bit in here about the time duality, like the immersive time versus the process time. I kind of view this as like deep work and shallow work.
Yep.
You could probably do this a lot of different ways. Figure out your own productivity system, and you can figure out 2 different states, high energy and low energy. And you can break up your day based off of that. Chris Bailey would talk about your biological prime time, and don't try to do your writing when you typically have like the early afternoon lull right after you eat lunch or something, So I think that's an important point here too. But I don't see these things kind of going on at the same time and needing to put a marker down as soon as I hear about something and then immediately switching to something else and just continuing that pattern. At some point, I'm going to focus on things. And I guess with a kitchen, maybe it's a little bit different because you don't know when that order is going to come in and you have to get a pan down. But I at least have the luxury where I can close my email client and I don't open it till the end of the day. And like I said, I'm bad at email. Maybe I check it or I get through everything like once a week. But that's a choice that I make. You don't have that choice in a kitchen, and you probably don't have that choice in an office environment either for a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't have that choice. And the example you gave of flagging emails, like that's a good one because that's exactly what I do. Is I'm running through email and I'm flagging the ones that I need to spend more time with. But the catch there is that I have time in my day scheduled for when I'm going to go deal with those, because it's not uncommon for me to get a single email that can take me 30 minutes. Like that does happen on a regular basis, probably on a daily basis. A lot of my day anymore is, reacting to whatever comes at me. So I don't know what I'm going to deal with most days. So I don't really get to plan a lot of things ahead of time. I can plan, like the new projects that we're working on, or when I'm going to respond to new client emails and such, like that sort of thing I can plan on. But, dealing with, bugs in the system or doing deployments and stuff like that stuff is real time, and I'm on the phone or in the email client back and forth with clients for an extended amount of time. So as little fun as that sounds, especially to you, I'm sure, like that is just the way that the world of client work seems to work, especially in web development.
Yeah, that's why I'm not there.
Fun times. All right, number 5, finishing actions. Why don't you introduce this one? I feel like this one's right up your alley.
Sure. So the key point here is that 90% done is 0% done, which makes sense from a chef's perspective. You're either done with a dish and it's presentable, it's exactly what the customer expects, or it's not done and it's not going out. And I guess like the way I work with agent efficiency and some of their teams, like using the Scrum method and really Agile or Kanban, you could apply this a couple different ways. It doesn't have to be specifically Scrum canon, but it's kind of built around this idea of the only work you get done is the work that you actually ship. And that really talks about like that was really the main idea in this section to me was finishing these actions, because the ones that you don't get finished kind of don't count. He talks about how excellence is quality delivered, and he mentions in here, and this is the talking point I put down, is the reasons why we stop. So the reasons that we don't finish actions, and he lists 4 specific things: fear, fatigue, scatteredness, and overconfidence. And I thought maybe it'd be worth unpacking a little bit, like what are the ones that we struggle with? I think for me, one of the things I am prone to, although I tend to not say no to stuff, especially once I've said yes in the first place, like it's hard for me to go back and say, you know what, I was wrong. I can't do this. So I think for me, maybe one of them is overconfidence. And I don't have specifically like the list of things that I'm not able to do because I've said yes to too much, but I'm sure that they're there. I think the way that this manifests for me is that I just don't have the margin a lot of times to recognize the better opportunities that are right there. Not necessarily even better work opportunities, but opportunities to spend time with my family, for example. Those are the things that can keep me from shipping, quality time with my kids. Yeah. If you want to phrase it that way.
I think probably the one that I struggle with is probably around the fatigue piece that he talks about. I feel like I have especially with, running a business with web development as its focus in a niche market that has no real competition for me. Like there are a few freelancers that compete with what I do, but there's not really another business per se of another team that competes with it, which means that we get a ton of work and it's easy to get overwhelmed and it's hard to keep up with. So because of that, it's easy for me to look at, here's an example. So I just pulled up my Communicate perspective on OmniFocus. So these are emails, phone calls, Slack messages, you name it, Trello board updates, like they're all over the place. I have a little over 120 of these that I need to do right now. And when I look at that list, it's draining to even consider that I need to get through all of that. So I have a tendency to say, there's so much to do there. Obviously, I'm not going to get it all done. It can wait an hour. Like, that's my tendency. Yep. And it's frustrating because it means that list can get longer than I can keep up with. So then what you really have to do is either bring somebody on to do it for you or just, eat your frog or, do the scheduling piece or try to figure out what it is that's keeping you from jumping in or take off a small piece of that and work on that. But that's what I struggle with is just the sheer fatigue of the volume of things that I need to be doing at any given time. But some of this has to do with just right now I'm dealing with a lot of health issues, and we talked about that last time. And that has put me in a spot where I am getting behind on a daily basis, which means it continues to accrue. So then the question is, what can I drop And those are never fun conversations.
Yep.
Those are some things that Mike and I were talking about ahead of time. Quick note, Bookworm's not going anywhere. So if that ever crossed your mind, I'm sticking around with Bookworm. So that's not a thing I'm cutting. But those are the conversations I have to have. I'm not currently cutting anything, but I'm readjusting where I spend my energy because of those issues. But right now, that fatigue piece, definitely the one that's keeping me from completing things, for sure.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that one specifically because I knew that was something that you were dealing with, but there's a point that they make in this book which I think is important for everybody else who is not going through like a physical thing. They mention that fear often masquerades as fatigue. So if you find yourself in that position where, oh my gosh, look at all these things I have to do, I'm so tired, I don't want to do any of them, the root issue really might be fear. Fear that you landed this job and you sold yourself and your skills, and maybe they're not where you said they were, and you're afraid that you're not going to be able to deliver on the quality of a thing, so you just drag your feet and don't even start. I've been there.
Yep.
Or on the other side, maybe you can do this thing and you're a little bit scared of your success. And that sounds stupid to say, but we've unpacked that before on this podcast, where I think I've kind of dealt with that to some degree, where it's like, well, yeah, I know I can do this, and I'll kind of do it halfway because I don't really want to see where it's going to go, because that'll force me to make an uncomfortable decision about some other things, and I'll have to let those things go. So I think that there's a couple different ways that this fear could masquerade as fatigue, and it, I could totally see how that could manifest in the lives of just about any of our listeners. The other thing I want to call out from this section is the comparison that he makes between striving for perfection and perfectionism. Perfectionism, he says, is creating something of highest quality. So if your skills aren't to a certain point, you will not be able to create something of highest quality. And you will tweak and tweak and tweak and edit and edit and edit and revise, never ship the thing. That's perfectionism. But striving for perfection is something a little bit different, in my opinion anyways, when I read this. He says striving for perfection is delivering something of highest quality. So it's doing the very best that you can, but shipping the thing, saying this is the best that I can do, and then let other people weigh in on whether it's good enough or not. If you're in a 5-star restaurant, you're doing a 3-star job, like, you need to know that you're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that this isn't a great dish that you created, or this isn't a great article that you wrote, or this isn't a great podcast episode that you recorded, whatever, for where you are right now. And the value is in the journey. I think like striving for perfection, that's kind of like the growth mindset sort of thing. Like, I'm going to spend an honest effort, doing this thing, getting it as good as I can, but I am going to throw this out there, and for better or worse, people will say stuff about it, but I don't care. I'm going to learn from it, and I'll do better next time.
Yes. I don't know what to add to that. I was sitting here trying to think. I was like, okay, how do I jump in after that? I don't even know. So, well done.
Thanks. Sorry for making it awkward.
No, it's okay. It's all right. No, I think that's a good points there. So let's jump into the next one, to number 6, slowing down to speed up. I think this is maybe one of the most called out pieces, per se, if about like the whole meditation thing, mindfulness piece that we were talking about earlier. I think this is maybe where it manifested itself the most. But the idea is that if you're going too fast, you tend to get sloppy.
Yep.
And when you get sloppy, you're not as effective, and you don't accomplish as much. So with chefs in the kitchen, if you're moving too fast with a knife, you're possibly making a mess of the counter instead of just your cutting board, and you're also creating more of a mess for yourself to clean up later. So it takes more to get it all done. But if you chop slower and more deliberately, you don't create as much of a mess. Like, that is the concept here, I think. And so much of, we were talking about like 10% happier. Okay, should a Joe do meditation? Probably. Is Joe going to do meditation? Not likely. At least not.
He doesn't have time.
Not until Mike makes me read the book. But, these are things that, Joe should probably do. But we're not going to do it right now. So I play around with a lot of, can I be more intentional with each individual email and making it cleaner so that it doesn't require as many back and forths? Like that is how I tend to translate it. That doesn't work when you have a super high volume. But anyway, that's beating a dead horse at this point. But I think there's a lot of potential here for doing less and more deliberately so that you're more effective, which I think is a common theme we see across a lot of these books, and even have some of the books that we've read that are specifically dedicated to that topic. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on it, Mike?
The key phrase here is that chefs never run because they're always in the right place, which kind of blew my mind. Like if you see a chef running, that's a red flag immediately to an experienced chef. It's like, you don't know what you're doing, because you wouldn't have to run if you knew what you were doing.
Yep.
Now contrast that to just about anything you see online, like the Gary Vaynerchuk's, like hashtag hustle, and I wrote a book called Thou Shalt Hustle, but I've got a different approach to it than he does. And I think that that's important. I think that that's one of the big lessons you can glean from this book. And it really challenged me, because there are times when I get frantic. I think for the most part, I do a pretty decent job with this. But I've got an action item from here. I don't think I wrote it down because there's no way you're going to be able to hold me accountable to this. But when I feel pressured, when I feel the need to rush, I want to go deliberately slower when I feel rushed.
Yeah.
And you can apply that to responding to email. You could apply that to writing an article. I mean, there's so many ways that you could apply this. I'll just use the writing an article one as an example, or writing a script for a video or whatever. Typically, when I sit down to write a blog post or write a script for a video, I've got an idea of how many words I need. So sometimes in Ulysses, I'll even put that as like a goal, and then you can see the circle fill up, and when you get it long enough, it turns green and releases all those happy chemicals in your brain. But I don't often do that because I'm quote unquote in a rush.
Yep.
I just got to bang this thing out, and sometimes I can do it. Sometimes I sit down at the keyboard and I'm like, okay, words, come to me. And I realized that at that point, like, I'm just pushing too hard. And sometimes I feel so stupid because I'll sit there for like 20, 30 minutes, and the longer it takes to like get something, the more pressure you feel. It's kind of the same like when you're going to bed and you're like, I got to get up early tomorrow morning. Oh my gosh, it's 11:30. I've only got 6 more hours. Like it just makes it harder for you to fall asleep. I feel like I do the same thing when it comes to my creative work sometimes. So I want to be intentional about what next time I'm in that state, say, okay, calm down. We're just going to start real slow. Just one sentence, And I think that is going to be enough to help get me moving and not waste all that time spinning my wheels. Okay, I got to do this. I got to do this. I got to do this. Thinking about all the things I have to do after I fold up my iPad and I'm done writing or whatever. I think that this is going to help me to consistently be moving in the right direction. And I want to deploy this tactically.
I think this is similar to when I like taking my book and reading in stressful situations, or stopping and going and reading. To me, it's similar to that, at least what you're talking about. It seems like it applies there. Maybe you could correct me on that, but it seems like it's and that's been something that's led me to reading a little bit more. But I've been doing less reading overall lately because of that overwhelm piece that I'm dealing with right now. So health has not been kind to me, and it's been causing problems there. Recurring theme noted, but I feel like doing a book and reading a book during stressful times has been extremely helpful to me and slowing me down. But I'm kind of being forced to slow down right now.
Yep.
But that's life. That's the way it goes.
Yeah, and I guess the action item for me, or the application of this for anybody else who is not dealing with something physically being forced to slow down, is to do that anyways. And there are productivity benefits that come from that. Because like you said, if you slow down, you're not going to be making such a mess. You're not going to have to fix things later. You're going to get it right the first time. And I think a lot of it for me just comes down to the procrastination. Like, I don't want to do this right now.
Right.
But I will just, I'm just going to write a couple sentences. Just going to do this for 5 minutes. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you take one step in the right direction, it gets a whole lot easier. That's kind of the approach I want to take.
The just get it started, like just do the first thing.
Just get it started. But the way to do that is to slow down and to scale it back. Yeah. Like not say, okay, 1,000 words, half an hour, go. Because I've done that before. And sometimes I get done and I'm like, hey, that's actually really good.
Right.
But not always. And when it doesn't happen, don't get frustrated. And, for the first 5 minutes when nothing's coming, don't be like, okay, now I got to get 1,000 words done in 25 minutes. Like, okay, no. First minute, this isn't working. What we're going to do is we're just going to scale this back. We're just going to do this. You can do this. This is easy.
Right.
I want to make it to the point where, like, if you don't do it, it would be stupid because it's so simple and so easy to do, which is exactly the opposite of where my brain typically goes. It's like, okay, now you got less time to do this thing. This thing's going to be even harder. Now you really got to bring your A game. I want to be able to say, no, you don't need your A game. Let's just settle for a C this time and just get the ball moving. And I think that's probably going to be, I don't know this off the top of my head, but I want to apply this, like I said, tactically when I recognize myself in that situation, which has been a couple times even today. I'm guessing that I'm going to be amazed at like how many different areas of my life I'm going to be able to apply this to.
Right.
But I can think of a couple of my daily work already where this would really help out a lot.
At least get you on the right track, it sounds like.
We will see.
It's worth a shot.
All right. We've been talking for a while and we haven't even gotten to the working clean system. Should we go there next?
Sure. So we can talk about GTD.
Yeah, actually, I was going to try and do this section without talking about GTD.
Now, why would we do that? Because that's what it is. So.
That's true. I called out a couple of things in the outline here, which I wanted to talk about. One of them we kind of mentioned already, the two types of actions, the scheduled and the unscheduled. He calls these steps to achieving your missions, and he's got 3 different types of missions, self, work, and family. He talks about how there's no difference between tasks and appointments. Already talked about how I don't really agree with that. But that being said, I guess you're right. Like the rest of this kind of is GTD-ish, although there's no cool diagram to go with it.
Yeah, the cool diagram is what makes it, definitely.
Yep, maybe that's why he wrote a new version. Maybe he's got a diagram now.
I was trying to see if I could pull up all the individual steps. Did he write?
There's 4 steps that he wrote in the back of the book, and some of them have more than one sub-step. So it's not really 4 steps, but the 4 steps are clean your station, sharpen your tools, plan your day, and gather your resources. So under clean your station, he's got 3 that I wrote down anyways. Maybe there's more, but these are the ones that I jotted down. Empty and log your physical inputs, clear and log your digital inputs, and set the table. I view that as like getting your workstation ready so that when it's time to sit down and do your work, you can do that as easily as possible. Asian Efficiency calls this clear to neutral, in my opinion. And then the other 2, there's basically analog and digital buckets that you've got to empty. I do think, though, that it's more complicated than just, okay, empty the analog bucket and empty the digital bucket. Like there are multiple buckets that need to be emptied. And I think there's value in identifying the different inboxes that you have in your life that you want to empty regularly. That's one of my action items with my daily me's. I've already identified my email inbox, my OmniFocus inbox, and my drafts inbox. But maybe there's a couple others. I really haven't set aside the time to think about this yet. And I want to make a list of all of the things so that I can say, okay, yep, did that. Okay, I'm done. And I think until you identify those inboxes, you really can't be sure that you've emptied and logged your physical inputs and cleared and logged your digital inputs.
Yeah, I have a whole list of inboxes that I, like in my Mise en Place project, I have process inboxes is one of those, but that's actually a sub-checklist because there's a few different points throughout the week that I'll run through that. I'm just trying to get it to where it's daily. But that list is where I can collect. These are the list of inboxes that I want to process regularly. It's amazing how often I find myself adding one to that list. Like, oh, there's another inbox.
Right.
That I have been ignoring for months. Maybe I should do something about that. Yes. I like the concept of scheduled versus unscheduled work, but I think that comes back to the conversation we started off with in the first ingredient of planning is prime, because I think that's similar to, like, schedule stuff has to do with, like, the appointments and things that have to happen at a certain time, or, like, for me, deployments for websites. But then there's a lot of the other side of it that we were talking about where you schedule blocks to work on a type of task, and that's kind of unscheduled, where I'm going to work on things that doesn't have a set date and time. I think that's the two differences there. At least that's how I'm thinking about it. It seems to work out well that way, for me anyway.
Yeah, you can totally figure out how to make this work for you, but I think unless you spend some time thinking about it and identify all those things, it by default will not work for you. Again, just physical, digital isn't enough. Maybe, go ahead and give a bunch of examples there. He does talk about the tools for working clean in another section in this third course here. I don't know. Maybe that is enough, but when I read this, I immediately thought like, well, it's more complicated than that. I get what he's doing. He's trying to condense this down into a simple 4-step system, but I don't know. It's not that easy, I don't think.
Did you look up their app?
I did not look up the app. I forgot about the app.
There is a Work Clean app. Highly, highly encourage you to skip it. Yeah, I mean, it's different. There's not even enough ratings to show a rating on it that tells you how little it's been used. The last time it was updated was a year ago. I think that speaks for itself. Like that's all you need to know there. Don't use the app. That's what I'll tell you. I downloaded it just to see what it was all about and got really confused. You can set up what he calls missions, and then you choose the first action for that mission, and then the rest of the actions you define for that mission are back burner actions. Basically,
back burner context.
Yep. It's this whole series of projects, and you can only act on the first available action, to use the OmniFocus terminology.
I did look at this. I didn't download it, though. I took one look at it and nope.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's very bare bones and very little you can do with it seems. So, yeah, just skip it. Don't waste your time.
Just get yourself a back burner context in OmniFocus and you're good to go.
Do you still use that?
Not as a back burner anymore. I've got a couple things that have kind of replaced that. I would say that they've kind of been replaced by the ideas bucket and then the thinking time.
So
tags.
I was right.
So
it's not worth it.
Well, they are back burner stuff. They are things that don't have dates. They are always available. They're never like on pause, but they're not things that I will, in the course of my normal day, like go look at. I will wait until I've got thinking time set aside on my calendar, and then I'll pull up all my thinking time perspective, all the different tasks that are available there, and then I'll tackle one of those.
Right.
So again, like if not now, when? Who cares? Is my answer. When I get to it, when I'm good and ready.
Fair enough.
So the spirit of the back burner lives on, but
okay. I still think I win.
You long-term win.
Okay.
I think the other, just to run through the other steps here real quickly, sharpen your tools, talks about adjusting your calendar and adjusting your action list. This makes a lot of sense. The thing I would push back with here is that the action list should not appear on your calendar. I think that those need to be two separate things.
Yeah.
Number 3, plan your day. Totally on board with that one. And then number 4, gather your resources, gather the tools you're going to need ahead of time. That I completely agree with. The 4 steps here, whether you decide to use these, whether you decide to use GTD or something else, I do think that on page 227, there's a quote that I really like here that kind of sums up this whole thing. He says, process dodgers believe that they are artists and that creativity needs complete freedom. But true creatives, the people who actually make the food, the art, the architecture, the products, and the services we enjoy, understand that excellence comes from cultivating a craft through dedicated, dogged practice. True artists have a process. 100% yes. Like it doesn't matter what your process is, but once you land on that process, that is the thing that is going to allow you to be creative. It's not just waiting until inspiration hits. Wasn't it Stephen Pressfield, the War of Art that we talked about? He has a quote in there from some guy. He's like, I only write when inspiration hits. Fortunately, it shows up every day at 9:00 sharp or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
If you set up your system and you follow the process, then the results kind of take care of themselves.
It's been a while back now, but at one point, David Allen was doing some interviews with creatives who were using GTD, because he's been on this thing for a long time and saying how, people who are drawn to GTD are the people who need it the least, whereas the people who need it the most are typically like creatives and such. So he was finding people, one of which I think was a rock musician who used GTD to write more songs in a year than they ever had. And, that seems to strike a chord, at least with me, because I feel like I'm drawn to GTD because I know that I need it and I fail miserably without it. So that's at least my view. But this is work clean, not GTD. But, it's the same system. When you look at how he lays it out, it's the same thing. Just saying.
Nice.
Yep.
End it there?
I think so.
Before we get to the action items, I want to just say that the way this book is written, I had a ton of action items. I actually dialed them back quite a bit for the ones that I put on this list here. But the way that he wrote this really got me thinking about things in a different light. And so that was definitely a pleasant side effect, I guess, of reading this book, was that even though a lot of these principles I've heard before, the way that he phrased them showed me areas of my life that I could apply stuff like this. But to keep the next episode from being a completely follow-up episode, I picked 4.
Fair enough. All right.
So the first one, I said, put routines on my calendar, and then in parentheses again, because I have done this. I have a calendar on I use BusyCal to manage my calendars. I've got several different personal calendars. One of them is called Goose. It's the whole idea of protect the golden goose. And those are the things that I used to schedule on there when I was going to go for my runs or when I was going to go to the gym, my morning routine, stuff like that. And I want to get back into updating that calendar. It kind of fell by the wayside when I started plotting out everything and time blocking everything on the piece of paper. But I can totally see how putting this first, putting the big rocks in, self-care first, will have benefits. So I want that not to be an afterthought.
Okay.
Also, rethink sequential projects in OmniFocus. So you mentioned the Work Clean app. That is built around the idea of sequential projects. There's one thing you can work on right now. Everything else is on the back burner. I have never used sequential projects in OmniFocus except when I absolutely needed to. Probably 98% of my projects are parallel projects. But he talks a lot about doing the first thing, making first moves and stuff like that, and identifying the things that you can do right now. I realize that the reason I tend to go to parallel projects is because I don't want to put any extra effort to identify what order these things need to be done in. And so that challenged me. A lot of these projects, maybe they are sequential projects, and I need to go back and spend a little bit more time in my next weekly review and clarify some of that stuff and change them from parallel to sequential. Next one is to write out my daily me's. We talked about that. And the last one, I'm trying to think which ingredient this was from, but he talked about, ingredient 9, inspect and correct. So identifying the things that are broken and then fixing them. One of the things that I wrote down there was to keep a list of the mistakes that I make. So the next time something is super hard.
Is this going to be public?
Maybe. It'll probably be pretty embarrassing.
I was expecting a pretty firm no on that.
Well, we'll see.
Okay.
I want to, though, recognize when something is not working, and instead of getting frustrated about it, just that'll be my cue to jot something down, probably in drafts initially. I'm guessing that when it comes to fixing these things, I'll create a list in OmniFocus. But my first step is just to make a list of all the mistakes that I make throughout my day. So go to the store and forget something, that's going to go on the list. Or go downtown and realize, I forgot my computer, so can't do any work at the co-working space. That is a ridiculous example. That doesn't happen. But stuff like that, I want to jot down and have a list.
Sure.
Not to say, hey, look at what a big loser you are, but to identify the ways that I can eliminate the friction as I go about my day.
Fair point. I am kind of surprised you don't use sequential projects in OmniFocus. Like that is...
I probably should. Reading this book makes me want to. So I think I need to. And like I said, I do occasionally, but for the most part, I just do parallel projects whenever I can. So I want to rethink that.
Yeah, I feel like I have a number of like templated projects that I use for that, like releasing a bookworm episode. Like that's a classic because there's a whole series of steps and they have to happen in a certain order. I can't share the link on Twitter unless the link exists. So, those pieces have to be done in a certain order. So that's where sequential projects come in for me, is usually something that I know is going to repeat. Anyway, so mine, I have 4, maybe 3, depending on how you define a couple of these. Daily me's, I mentioned like this flux of between shutdown ritual and evening ritual. Because like, as we're recording this, it's 4:00, just after right now. And usually I would have started that process 30 minutes ago. So do the math. I didn't do it yet today. So how does that happen on those days? Like those one-offs, do you just skip it and do it the next morning and it's entirely? I don't know. But those are some things I want to try to nail down. As part of that daily me's, one of the steps there is to like plan out the next day in my digital calendar. I've tried this in the past, but I think I've been coming at it wrong because I want to start using this OmniFocus forecast view, especially since OmniFocus 3 for Mac is coming out very soon. I think, isn't it a couple of weeks that's supposed to come out? 3 or 4 weeks, I think.
It is officially September, but no specific date.
Yeah, because I think they were waiting to figure out when the new Xcode was going to release. And I am drawing a blank on when that was supposed to happen. Maybe they don't know yet.
Well, Have releases September 24th.
So that would tell me the new Xcode would release September 24th. That has to be out before they can submit it. So it's probably the last week of September.
Yep.
Before that can come out. Anyway, I want to start using that. I'm primarily going to use it for my phone anyway. So it's not a huge deal that it's not on the Mac right away. But I want to start doing this scheduling of time blocks throughout the day. Maybe that's hyper-scheduling. I don't know. Kind of weird phrasing there. So anyway, I want to work on that. And then finally, I want to sketch out my desk and try to get it laid out better because I think I've got it set up wrong. And I'll share that as best I can. I don't really know what that's going to look like. Maybe it's going to be on the whiteboard. That'd be kind of cool.
That would be cool.
I don't know. We'll see what happens during one of my brainstorming sessions. It'll be scary.
Send us pictures.
Yeah, that's true. I'll take pictures. Okay. Got it. On it. All right. Author style and rating. You made the comment that it's easy to come away from this with a lot of action items. I was in the same boat. I have like different ways of thinking about things because of this. I think that has to do with the fundamental premise of the book because it's based around something in real life, not just theory. A lot of books that we read seem to come from the basis of scientific research or a theoretical concept that they have proposed. And although that's great, I think this comes at it the other way around. Like they're taking a real-world scenario and pulling principles out of that, which means it naturally has a lot of examples and it has a lot of very practical and sometimes very small details that you can apply, which I think for you and I is something that we tend to gravitate towards. Like, oh, I could tweak that just this little way. Like we like to tweak and fuss with things. So I think it applies to us very well in that realm. So I think it's a great book, and I should note this is a listener recommendation, and thank you for the recommendation. We'll talk about how you can do that here in a little bit, but this is one that I'm glad to have read it. I think that he's a good writer because I feel like his ideas I understood pretty well. In a couple places, I felt like he kind of botched the example versus the way that he was talking about it when we went over that a little bit. So I think as far as a rating, I'd put it at a 4, just because I think there's a lot that you can take away from this. But I wouldn't say it's over the moon going to completely alter everything you ever do and completely change the way that you do work. Like, I wouldn't say that. And I don't think it fits in the category of those 4.5s and 5s that we have floating out there. So I'm going to put it at 4.
I'm going to join you at 4 stars. It's a good book. It's not a great book. It's not life-changing, but there's lots of things that I'm going to apply from this, or I'm going to give a shot anyways. I think the core ideas are pretty powerful. I also think that they are explained in the first section.
Yeah.
I think the 10 ingredients part is the weakest part of this, but it's also the longest part. So if you were to cut out a section of the book, I don't know, maybe first course and third course, or at least condense the number of ingredients. I think 10 is maybe too many.
Right.
And it doesn't really explain like how you're going to apply these using the system either. I kind of feel like the first course talks about the values of mise en place. The third course talks about committing to the values, implementing the values in the system, but doesn't really say, here's how you apply the 9th ingredient, the 10th ingredient. Lots of stories, so those are good, although not really caring about the culinary world. Sorry.
Yeah.
I felt like a lot of these stories started to sound the same. I was tempted to skip a lot of the later ones. I didn't. I read them, but I felt like a lot of the stories, even though the people were sometimes even the same between story to story, it was hard to keep track. Like, okay, this thing happened to this person, and this was the lesson. Now this person's back, and they're creating a different point based on this person. They're going to tell another story about another person, totally different situation. They got to set that all up, in the first part of each chapter. Didn't really care for that. But I do think that it's a good book, and I would recommend it. I'm glad that we read it. I already told my wife that she should read at least the first part of it. I think this whole idea of mise en place is really important, and it's kind of become a rallying cry. So whenever we notice that like something's out of place or too hard, we kind of mise en place, and just kind of needle each other to like, hey, let's clean this up, sort of a thing.
There you go. I subtly recommended that to my wife that she should read it, and she read the tagline on it, "What great chefs can teach us about organization," and she looked at me and said, "No, not reading that." Like, okay. Fair enough. I think that wraps up work clean. So what's up next, Mike?
Next book is my choice, and that is The Happiness Advantage by Sean Achor. And the one after that is officially assigned to you, but I kind of pushed you into this.
Well, we're gonna. So first off, The Happiness Advantage. The tagline on that is how a positive brain fuels success in work and life. I'm very interested in this one. I'm kind of glad you picked it. So. It's an international bestseller, so can't be bad, right? Right?
Shouldn't be bad.
So anyway, that's Mike's official pick, and then we're kind of doing like a special thing after that. I don't know what you want to call it. It doesn't really fit.
Yeah, let's not make too many promises here.
Okay.
But let's just say we are going to cover hyperfocus, and maybe we'll have a special bonus.
Okay. Yeah, there's a potential bonus in there. So this is kind of a joint selection, I would say. So anyway, it's different, and I don't really know what that's going to mean quite yet. What's going to happen is Mike has the next selection, which is the Happiness Advantage. Then we're going to do Hyperfocus, and then I'll select a book for after that, and I don't know what that is yet. So Mike is next, then we're joint next, and then after that I'll pick one up, and then we'll go back into the order of things. So it might throw things off with if people are used to odd or even on who's picking and such.
Yep.
Because I think there's a few people that have mentioned it's like, oh, Joe always picks on the even number episodes. I'm like, well, sorry, we're going to throw that off.
We messed that up not too long ago with the
It's
draft
true,
anyways.
it's true, we did. So now we got to get it back online, so that's why we're doing it. totally. That's the 100% the reason why we're doing this.
And then for Gap Books, I have access again to a pre-release, which is Atomic Habits by James Clear. Now, James Clear is one of my favorite internet writers, and he writes a lot about habits. If you've ever read any of his stuff, it's jamesclear.com. Atomic Habits looks to be a lot of the same type of writing, so I'm anxious to dive into this one.
Okay, so you haven't started it yet. I was going to ask you how it compared to The Power of Habit, so I'm curious.
I've just read the first section, which is his story, which is pretty wild.
Okay.
I'm going to mess up some of the details, but basically he was, I believe, a baseball player in high school, got like hit in the head with a bat and rushed to the hospital, and basically had to like reform his life. Was pretty serious, and doctor said, you're going to deal with this stuff, yada, yada, yada. And he was able to overcome a whole bunch of it through habits, through having to address it that way. More details maybe forthcoming.
Okay.
But
Fair enough. I'm interested in that one. But yes, I actually did get a Gap book read this last time around. Love is the Killer app by Tim Sanders. You did this one.
Such a good book. Yeah.
You did this one. It's a little odd given that it was written in 2002.
Yep.
And he's talking about how great Yahoo is.
He was like the chief operations guy or something for Yahoo. So
but this is 2002. So, I mean, Yahoo was...
He was working with Mark Cuban.
Yeah, it was a big deal then. So it's a little odd to be reading it now, thinking about then. But other than that, it's been great. I'm almost wrapped up with it, but I've really enjoyed it. So it's a good one.
Principles are so good. In fact, the subtitle of that, I was just looking at it. I don't have it in front of me, but we read How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's
How to Win Business and Influence Friends.
Yes, exactly. It's kind of a different take on that, which I thought was kind of clever.
It's cool. I like it. It's a fun book.
All right, so if you want to recommend a book, you can do so at bookworm.fm/list. I believe that's got a list of all the books and a button to recommend a book, but there's also the Bookworm Club. So that's club.bookworm.fm, and you can register there and recommend a book and vote for ones that you want us to cover.
And, if you join the club, it's easy to recommend a book. There's a button at the top that says recommend. And if you click that same button on the bookworm.fm site, that's just what it does. It takes you over there so that you can recommend a book there. Just share the link to the book on Amazon. That way we can figure out which one you're talking about and tell us why you want us to cover it. But also, there's a link in the show notes for the iTunes show. So click on that. You can leave us a review. Are we still trying to take down KCRW? This is kind of your thing.
We are. I've got it open. So I've got a couple reviews to call out here.
Okay.
First is Kooks142002, who says, I love learning new things. I've got a long list of books to read. Can't read them fast enough. A lot of those books I want to read or have already read are reviewed in great detail by these two people. Joe and Mike dissect productivity books in detail in an entertaining way. After listening to each episode, I feel like I get almost as much out of it as if I were to read the book in the first place. I add a book every now and then to my reading list, but I'm happy just learning what I can, listening to Joe and Mike in many cases. From listening to this, I think the best thing I've gotten out of it is the action list. The hosts create each week based on the books they read, how to apply what they learn each week into real life. I've started doing that myself, get more out of every book I read this way. This has become my favorite podcast. So thank you, Kooks142002, for that 5-star review.
That's really cool.
I also want to call it a 1-star review.
Ooh, bad
okay,
with the
so
good
this
even.
one,
Wow.
Our first 1-star review.
Awesome.
This is by Jesse Geek. Says, so close to being a great podcast, but both of the hosts can't seem to make it a single episode without discussing their religion. This would be appropriate for a religious podcast, but for a podcast about nonfiction books, this completely undermines the host's credibility. 1 star. Sorry, Jesse. I am who I am, and I'm sorry that it's so close to being a great podcast for you, but me telling my story makes it intolerable to listen to. I know that there's going to be people out there who are just completely turned off by that, but I don't know. I can't fake it. As I said to somebody in the Bookworm Club, you should read these types of books and these types of books. Well, I'm not interested in those types of books.
Yeah.
I don't consider this, by the way, a nonfiction podcast. It's a growth-minded podcast. So I would say that we're here because we want to learn and be better than we were yesterday. And we invite anybody who wants to do the same thing and can tolerate can tolerate us to join us for the journey.
It's so great to being a great podcast, and then you rated it a 1. I don't really think we rate that way.
I guess we weren't that close.
Yeah, apparently we were way off. Yeah, I don't put much stock in those, but that's the way it goes. So anyway, if you want to be like the first reviewer there, and you have a bunch of action items, if you want, you can share them on the club. Like that's a way to do that if you want. If you're looking for a little bit of accountability, Mike and I have each other, and we have this show, and we have all of you that are keeping us honest. So there's a little bit of accountability there as well. But if you want some of that accountability, you can use the Bookworm Club for that as well. So feel free to share your action items out there as well.
All right. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. The next book that we're going to cover is The Happiness Advantage by Sean Achor, and we will talk to you in a couple weeks.